Now that right there is a fantastic image to kick this all off. Oh! Okay, that was goddamn quick. Hello there everybody, Saban92 aka Nightmare, and finally, welcome to the house in Fata Morgana, the Dreams of the Revenant edition. I have been sitting on this game for almost 10 months, waiting for the opportunity, waiting for the slot to open. And finally, I could not wait any longer, because my original plan was to do this after I completed Rose Guns Day Season 3, but fuck it, I can't wait any longer. I have made people wait for far too long for this. Now, apparently I don't have this stuff unlocked. I think it's supposed to be, I'm supposed to inspect my memories to unlock the rest of these. So let's give this a try, shall we? Or not. Oh my. Ooh. Oh my god, autosave it. Oh. I can choose. Set when autosaves are corrected. I can set the autosaves at choices or every chapter. I'm gonna set it to at choices. Oh, that's cool. Ooh. Let's speed up the text display a little bit here. Yeah, only skip red text. Let's avoid that at all costs. Stop skipping choices. Automatically exit skip mode upon encountering a choice. Okay, but anyway, what I was going to say was, so, before we actually get started, I was told that it was probably a good idea for me to do the extra stories first. And I don't seem to know how to unlock back door. Ah, here it is! So this way I don't have to go through the story again, which, to be fair, Lord knows I'm going to be going through the story again. Because apparently this version has all updated new artwork, and the new Reincarnation chapters have voice acting, which brings me to something that I need to kind of ask you guys out of curiosity. So, the Reincarnation chapters has voice acting. But to be fair, I've done a lot of voices for this entire thing over the time that I've experienced its story, and I realize that some of the voices, specifically some, are a little bit more popular than what others seem to think. So I'm going to leave the question to you guys. Do I actually go forward and I do all the voices like I usually do? Or do I allow the voices to play out, and I do my own sort of ad-libbing, basically? I will let you guys decide. As for this first episode, from what I understand, the extra stories don't have voice acting, so I will be able to go all out! Alright, let's see what we got here. By answering 3 questions, you can unlock every story in the game. If this is your first time playing, we recommend following the game's natural progression. I love Fata Morgana to death. I've already experienced the whole story, so let's do this. What color rose did Michelle give Giselle? I believe, if memory serves, it was a red rose. How many keys are necessary to enter the mansion's observation tower? 3. What is the name of the elixir said to be able to cure any disease? Saint's blood. My memory is pure! Even after all of this time, I still remember everything. Congratulations, you answered all 3 questions correctly. You can now access every story in the game. Oh my god, look at that artwork! Oh my god, anime Morgana. Boy, do I look kawaii desu. I believe that's how the children nowadays say that. That's actually pretty cool. She's even got like a little rose, or I think it's called a rosary. That's actually quite nice. I really like her design here. But let's do the short stories I said I was going to do. I believe that was what I was recommended to do first. So let's do these. The vast majority of happenings in this world are not recorded in stories, either too trifling or adding no meaning to our lives. These facts of life are coldly cast aside with only the tiniest sliver deemed worthy enough. Each day we relentlessly discard unnecessary fragments of our lives, fucking forever lost to the very motor. It certainly is inevitable this way. Fuck! Tales afforded not their moment in the limelight, left to waste away in obscurity. Trophy well, thanks for this. Okay, thanks for the achievement. I'm sorry. I'm also giddy for this. I really missed the Fata Morgana stories. Okay. Okay, just calm down a little bit here. I'm geeking out a little bit. All right, let's see what we got here. A slow-killing poison, defectives, the painting's ramblings, the revenant's dream, lost. The maid and the beast, sisterhood of secrets, a cup of kindness. We have a lot to go through then. Now then. Oh God, get out of the Lord voice. We don't need him here right now. The maid spoke little of what happened after the white-haired girl's disappearance in the era of roses, for she believed the rest of the tale insignificant, of no value to share with her listener, the white-haired girl herself. Thus, her role as storyteller ended with the girl's departure from the stage, and while the other characters' stories continued on, they were cut from the script, afforded not their moment in the limelight, left to waste away in obscurity. A slow-killing poison. Arthur Baldwin was vexed. Shortly before they were to be married, his engagement with Nellie Rhodes, eldest sister of the Rhodes family, had been broken off. I remember this guy. He understood well enough why it had happened. And had it been this decision, he likely would have made the same one. So Arthur's dissatisfaction lay not in the dissolution itself, nor did he bear any fault in it. His bride-to-be had simply been gripped by madness. I hear she attacked an Abigail. Who? I was told she took one of her eyes out. Even worse, she killed her. Those are but rumors, my dears. The truth is so much more dreadful. I used to work at the Rhodes Manor, you see. And the young lady, she... Initially, Arthur was skeptical of what people were saying. He assumed the tales were being exaggerated as they spread. But when the head of the Rhodes family came personally to deliver reparations and formally nullify the engagement, he gave Arthur a rough overview of what had happened. It was apparently true that Nellie had assaulted an Abigail, and it was true that she spent most of her time in her room now, looking pale and sickly and drained of her spirits. Actually, wait a minute, I think we experienced this, maybe, already? And then, when he said outright, a demon's possessed her, Arthur had little choice but to believe something wasn't right. Let me guess, he's gonna immediately go back to that house to go see Nellie, and then we're gonna see how far she's gone down. Because I think we've actually already experienced this story. Actually, come to think of it, I'm actually kind of curious. I believe somebody once told me that which stories I need to go through, but I, for the life of me, am having trouble trying to remember, like, what specifically they were. And now I kind of feel bad that I don't remember exactly what they are. And to top it all off, Nellie's older brother Mel ran off to become a priest, presumably to get away from him. Nellie's father implored Arthur to remain discreet about her situation, not that he had any intention of going around and spreading personal details about her life. However, rumors have a nasty way of slipping through the tiniest of cracks, sneaking about through the dark like a seasoned catbird. What nobles like to refer to as social gatherings were in practice more like gossip gatherings, and in short order the Rhodes family eldest daughter was the talk of high society. Incidentally, the painter whose downfall eventually culminated into this tragedy was also strangled by the noble grapevine. Though, Arthur had no way of knowing as much. Perhaps the painter's curse extended beyond the girl's haircut, and the Rhodes family was destined to be brought to ruin by the gossip of their fellow aristocrats. Oh God, anything but the aristocrats. Yep. I think we've already experienced this, but fuck it. We may as well you know what? We may as well refresh our memory a little bit here, you know what I mean? One evening, Arthur decided he would sneak into the Rhodes Manor. He had requested visitations with Nellie on numerous occasions, but had been turned away every time. "She's in no condition for company," was what they kept telling him, which left him no choice but to see her uninvited. The aroma of the roses seemed more overpowering at night than during the day, and he wasn't sure whether it was just his imagination. The nagging irritation it caused in him was, however, not only in his mind. Arthur instructed his coachman to wait on the street a little ways out and made the rest of the way to the manor on foot, entering through the garden. As he waded through the sea of roses, he clenched his teeth. Arthur preferred restraint when it came to both gardening and girls.
What am I doing with my life? How did I end up here, sneaking about trying to find that obnoxious little girl's room?
Arthur had few pleasant memories of this rose garden. I cannot remember the voice that I gave Arthur, though. The Rhodes and Baldwins had a long history, so as a child he would often find himself left here to play while the adults did business. It was him. Nellie, who could never seem to stop hanging off her brother, and Mel, the textbook definition of a well-behaved aristocrat boy. Not once had he managed to step into the siblings' private world. There was only one room for the two of them. There was only room for the two of them, leaving Arthur stuck out there all by himself. The best he could manage was a little teasing now and then. For example, saying her hair looked like the color of fallen leaves.
I never asked for this engagement anyway. Who would even want to marry a girl who thinks herself some kind of princess? Not me, that's for sure. But still.
He had known her practically his whole life. Of course he was going to be curious when people were saying she had gone mad or had been possessed by a demon. He was just curious. He told himself as he drew nearer to Nellie's window. The curtains appeared to be drawn. He couldn't see anything inside. So he crouched down to pick up a few pebbles to toss over the veranda. A few soft taps rang on the night before the curtain finally shifted. A few moments later, a young girl stumbled out into the moonlight. Despite already knowing the answer, his first thought was, "Who is that?" He wanted to smack himself, but at the same time, it was hard to deny the discrepancies between the girl standing there and the girl of his memories. The moonlight seemed to give her flaxen hair a ghostly bluish tint. It fluttered in a passing breeze, and Arthur felt something about her he had never had before.
She's so pretty. Whoa, slow down. What's wrong with you? Pretty? That self-centered, spoiled little brat?
There wasn't a trace of the rambunctious Nellie he knew to be found. She stood there by the veranda's railing, gazing vaguely off into space like a pensive spirit. And honestly, even if I've already experienced some of this, I feel like it would be a good refresher for people who have waited for far too long for this. I hope you guys don't mind. It wasn't at all what Arthur had expected to see when he came calling. He assumed she would be nothing but skin and bones, haggard and unsightly.
Now, Lady Nellie, do you not think it rude to not at least greet me? We were engaged, as you might recall.
Her eyes still unfocused, Nellie turned her gaze down toward where Arthur stood. It was a reaction, but still he felt as though she had snubbed him, which did little to alleviate the irritation building up since he had arrived.
Look, it's like a scene right out of your beloved Romeo and Juliet. Not that I'm here enthusiastically, of course.
Mumbling complaints to himself, Arthur climbed a nearby tree, leaping from a branch onto the veranda. There she was, within arm's reach, but as distant as ever. Still, he could see nothing in her eyes.
Hello. Say something already, would you, Nellie?
Perhaps she really had lost her mind, just not in the way he had been led to believe. Arthur spent a few moments pondering how to proceed. He didn't consider himself a model gentleman like Mel, not even slightly, but he wasn't so crass as to laugh it off either.
Certainly are quiet tonight, aren't you? I'm not sure how I'm supposed to act when you're like a completely different person. Every time you open your mouth, I want to sew it shut. You're always complaining. Nothing's ever good enough for you. But right now, I just want you to say something. Anything. How am I supposed to know what's going through your head if you don't tell me? Or is there just nothing at all?
Nellie's gaze glided past Arthur into the rose garden behind him. Nellie, are you listening to me? He tried again and again to get her attention, calling her name, waving his hand in front of her face, gently tugging on her hair. But all his attempts were fruitless. She simply stood there, lifeless, a well-crafted doll. He wasn't sure exactly how to describe how he felt. Slightly unsettled to start, a bit of pity to go with it, and a great deal of something yanking at his insides. Arthur had few pleasant memories of the roads. That didn't mean he wanted to erase his past with them entirely, though. But looking at her, this empty shell, he felt almost as though those days were disappearing with her. How irritating. He knew the word wasn't right, but he went with it anyway, heaving a sigh after letting it linger in the air for a moment. It's always been like this. I'm no more than a buzzing insect to you. I can't stand this dreadful rose garden. It's exhausting having to come here again and again just because of our families are close. I would try to say something, and you'd go running off into your darling brother's arms. Dearest Mel this, dearest Mel that. Is that all you know how to say? And he would just give you a half-hearted smile and pretend to be sorry for not paying attention to you. Arthur looked out over the garden as well. He was more talking to himself than he was to Nellie. I'm sure you don't remember, but one time I even brought you flowers. What were they? Some kind of anemone, I think. But you wouldn't take them. You said the roses were prettier, so you didn't need my flowers. What a miserable day that was. But standing beside this silent specter, melancholy overwhelmed any anger or frustration he might have otherwise felt. Perhaps it was because he said what nothing he said managed to elicit any reaction out of him. Perhaps because he wished he had come out and said this all sooner. Unless expressed, feelings merely fester. I don't care one bit about you, and I mean that. It's only ever been about doing what's best for my family. Of course, Nellie was a perfect example of why you couldn't let everything out either. The gossip spoke not only of her attacking Abigail, but of her destroying her relationship with her brother. Yeah, he didn't really like that wig, did he? And that was likely what had done the most damage. Knowing what he knew of Nellie in her younger days, Arthur had little trouble believing what the rumors said. That her affection for Mel went far beyond simple familial love. It was for my family, but that doesn't mean I wasn't going to try to get along with you. You probably don't believe me, since I certainly never acted like it, but I genuinely did want us to be on good terms. It's just, you had to be the one who changed first. You were always treating me like I was worthless, like I meant nothing to you. Not like any of that would have even left an impression in your one-track mind, of course. But that's why I wanted you to take the first step. I'm not some wise old monk who can just turn my frustration off on command. Arthur let out another sigh. Do you think anything would have gone differently if I could have been more grown up? A gust of wind blew through, sending up a flurry of rose petals, carrying them up past the two of them and through the velvet curtains into Nellie's bedchamber. A faint smile crossed her lips. Arthur could only guess at what was going through her mind, what was reflected in her eyes. In her room, he could see several pairs of small children's shoes, a doll with its hair all neatly made up, a pile of sheet music drawn up for her by a respected composer years earlier, and toys carved from wood. It was like he was looking through a window into the past, because she's regressed back into that state where it was just her and her brother. That was all he needed to know. He could have treated her like the princess she thought she was, and she would have gone down the same path. Nellie's eyes were on one person only. Arthur wasn't even a shadow on her peripheral. Your brother's still smiling for you in there, isn't he? And that was all she needed. After that night, Arthur stayed away from the roads and never mentioned the siblings again. It was the best thing to do, he thought. He had his own life to worry about. But fate wouldn't allow him to avoid hearing about the family from time to time. About 4 years later, Nellie, who had apparently fallen ill, passed away at the young age of 18. The Rhodes held a small funeral service, which Mel did not attend. Arthur couldn't even begin to imagine what he, her brother, felt about it. Well, fuck, I don't think I want to, God, I don't even want to imagine the shit that he's experiencing right now. But another 3 years later, Mel followed behind her. At the age of 24, he threw himself off the top of a church tower. Yep. According to those near him, he had been acting unusual in the months leading up to his death, claiming he could hear a woman's voice talking to him. If he had taken his life out of grief, 3 years seemed like too long of a gap. Perhaps it had built up over time, and that was how long it took to reach the boiling point, but that's not how it felt to Arthur. It felt like Mel had been guided there by a higher power, or maybe pushed. And there was one other strange detail. He had died at exactly the strike of noon, as the bell rang its 12th toll. Yep. It is very interesting. It doesn't even tell you the ones that you've already gone through. But yes, I do vaguely remember a large amount of these. Let's see. Let's go over here. Let's see. A cup of kindness, sisterhood of secrets, the bait and made the beast, tune mage, a slice of sweet serenity of days long past, the ghost of Rose Manor, the not so little mermaid. Let's see. Scarlet in the coffee house, silent night, loneliness, boy meets girl. I'm very curious. Because I know what this one is about. It's kind of a hard decision here. Because I really do want to experience all of this again. Not only to do that, but to also just kind of refresh everybody's memories. Because, again, it has been quite a long time. And honestly, I may as well get myself back into the groove of this. But I'm gonna see something here. Because I think I remember what these three are. Let's see what Lost is. Lost. Master, I was wondering if I could ask for some time off. One autumn afternoon, a young maid stood in Jacopo's. Yes! I think I remember this. This is after Jacopo's story. A young maid stood in Jacopo's study requesting a vacation, effectively signaling her intent to quit. He lit a cigar with practiced motions, took in a deep breath, and then blew the smoke out in a long, slow stream. Again, he thought, making sure not to let it show on his face. What's your reason? He asked. Not satisfied with how you've been treated? I feel we've been quite generous. Oh, no, not at all, she said. In fact, you've been much better to me than my previous house. I have no complaints about the treatment I have received. Then why? If I knew you would quit so soon, I never would have hired you in the first place. But you've just started showing some improvement. Now all that time and money has gone to waste. I'm sorry. I'm asking for a reason, not an apology, he said. His voice a mixture of exhausted, irritated, and scolding that only made the girl recoil further. He let out another heavy sigh. Are kids these days all this soft? Christ, he thought. Another complaint to add to the mountain built up and locked inside. It's because, Out with it. You know I don't like it when people aren't straight with me. The young maid looked up at her master apprehensively. His dark brown eyes seemed to pierce straight through her soul, making her feel like she was being squeezed from the inside out. Other maids had been told her he was a lot softer than he used to be, but she couldn't imagine that at all. He was a rich, unmarried, testy man in his 30s. Everything about him was terrifying. Also, let's be fair, everybody missed Jacopo. And despite that, she was willing to face up to him and beg to quit because there was something even worse in the mansion. The head maid scares me. Jacopo raised an eyebrow. He had been expecting her to say he scared her. Did the head maid do something to you? He asked. No, she didn't. Then why? Ash fell from Jacopo's cigar. His irritation levels were rising. The young maid looked up at him, fear in her eyes. Are you not scared of her too, master? Her appearance never changes at all.
Oh, for God's sakes, I know she's an immortal woman!
The past few years, there had been an increase in maids quitting for vague, non-specific reasons, and he finally had his answer. When Jacopo purchased the mansion, he was 22 years old, taking the first step to expanding his family's influence in the New World. Yeah, we've experienced this. I need to figure out which ones that we haven't experienced. Like, the content of the story itself, I know, but it's the titles that I'm having trouble with. I may as well just go back. Like, go all the way back to the... Fuck it, you know what? Let's experience this together, then. Expectations for him were high, and the pressure was almost suffocating, but he was still an optimistic, ambitious young man at the time. He had to do this, and he had to do it right. And it was that determination that allowed him to maintain the softness in his heart beneath the tough businessman demeanor. Which is probably what led him to hiring the mysterious maid he had found in his newly acquired estate. She was there when he first stepped through the door, calling him Master, and showing him around the property. Then once she was done, she started working. Jacopo wasn't sure what to make of the woman, but she seemed to know what she was doing, and over time his suspicion slowly transformed into respect.
Where's your master?
He asked. My previous master passed away, she said with a perfect smile. As the new owner of this mansion, you are my current master. Assuming that meant the previous owner had just made no arrangements for her to transfer anywhere after he passed, Jacopo decided to let her stay and work as she wished. It was the responsibility of those with power to give work to those without, and he felt some satisfaction in taking her in. And for more than 10 years, she did that work almost flawlessly. And as long as she wasn't causing trouble, he didn't see any reason to pry into personal matters. How long had she been here? Why she worked as a maid, or who even she was? He never bothered asking her anything. But now he was 35, and the maid still looked to be in her early 20s, just as she had the day he arrived. Jacopo leaned back in his chair, staring absently up at the ceiling, watching the smoke from his cigar waved upwards. The young maid who quit was long gone, probably living with her family. He considered introducing her to a new house, but he'd had so many maids quit on him he was running out of acquaintances to foist them on. There was a knock on the door. He leaned forward and said,
Who is it?
It is I, came the voice of the head maid. He called her in, and the woman who stepped through the door was indeed identical in appearance to 13 years prior. She floated gracefully to the center of the office, not making a single sound. He felt almost like he was watching a ghost. One of the younger maids left today, she said, so I wanted to discuss with you how we should proceed redistributing the work.
I leave that to you as always. I'll take care of finding a replacement.
Yes, master, she said with a bow. Usually that would be the end of the discussion, and she would dismiss herself, but for some reason she stood there unmoving, her deep, unreadable eyes of jade locked on his.
What is it?
He asked with a frown, mildly uncomfortable. Have you considered dismissing me? She said, wearing the same faint smile she always had on. Her face was like a perfectly carved mask. I know that the maids have been quitting because of me. They've seen what I look like, and so rumors have been going around. The young girls are especially impressionable, so they are more likely to believe them. Have you considered dismissing me? Jacopo tapped his cigar against the ashtray on his desk, then leaned back in his chair. He had considered it before, but he always came to the same conclusion.
Every other maid could quit and it wouldn't slow down work as much as losing you.
Oh my, you think quite highly of me.
I know a capable worker when I see one, and you're more than capable. Well, sometimes I wonder if you've been doing this job for hundreds of years.
My, she said, her smile widening.
Oh yes.
You jest. If I had been a maid for hundreds of years, that would make me a ghost.
Well, aren't you? He almost said.
5 or 6 years ago, he might have been able to chalk it up to good makeup, but 13 years wasn't something you could just hide like that. Jacopo didn't like talk of ghosts or the supernatural or any of that nonsense, but it had reached a point he simply couldn't think of any natural explanation.
Why don't we have a little chat? I'd like to get to know a little bit about you. Her eyes went wide at his proposition. It had been a while since he'd seen her make a face other than pristine smile, but even her surprise seemed artificial. With her, only the most restrained of emotions came across as genuine. Is it going to rain tomorrow, Master? You've never shown an interest in me before. Indeed. You might want to set your overcoat out. Now, what was it you wished to know? What are you? He asked, not dancing around the question. The head maid gave a little giggle in response. I am but a mere maid, Master. Yeah, that's about what I figured you'd say. Next, who was your previous master? He was a very precarious man, drifting between man and beast. What the hell's that supposed to mean? Doesn't sound like a very good master to me. Did he even pay you? No, sir. The house was in shambles at the time. He let out another long stream of smoke. What on earth was she speaking of? When he had bought the property, it was a little outdated, but otherwise in good shape. If he took her at her word, that would have been at least 30 years ago. He wanted to press her further, but he knew she would just laugh and brush the question aside. So he took another puff of his cigar and asked, And who was before that? The father of 2 adorable little children. He was rarely at the house, though, so his wife, son, and daughter served as my masters. They were a noble family, and they treated me quite well. I didn't know nobility had lived here. My? You believe me, Master? Oh, so you realize it sounds ridiculous, do you? I understand that it may seem somewhat unbelievable to you, yes. Well, I'm not completely taking you at your word, that's for sure. This is just a casual conversation, after all, and I know we're all prone to some embellishment. So, who was before that? The sibling's grandfather. He was the man who taught me how to be an Abigail. I mean, a maid. He loved roses, and I would often go out and admire the flowers with him. Jacopo twitched at the word rose, a reminder of a great mistake he'd made years ago. He snuck a glance at the window, closed his eyes, and whispered, I see. All right, he continued. Who was before that? Before him was... Her gaze drifted upward, and then a rift formed in her persona, barely perceptible, but it didn't slip past Jacopo's notice. She still wore the eerily flawless smile, but the hair-thin cracks had appeared in her jade eyes, allowing a carefully hidden murkiness to seep to the surface. For a split second, she seemed to be weary to her core, looking out toward a faraway land she could never reach. And then it was gone, just as quickly. And with all of the knowledge that we have attained through our journey through Fata Morgana, every bit of this adds much more context to it. Before him was my dearly beloved, whose return I am still awaiting. For that reason, I hesitate to call them my master. I'm terribly excited for their eventual return, though. Sounds complicated, he said. I won't pry any further. She gave a wide smile. It was best to just leave it at that, he thought. They weren't friends. She was a maid, and he was her master. Next question, and I don't know how I never asked you this before, Jacopo said, letting it hang in the air for a second. What is your name? Saying it out loud only emphasized how ridiculous a question it was. He'd had this woman in his hire for 13 years without so much as knowing her name. With every other maid, he knew their name, age, family history, and more before they even signed the contract. But her, he never had a contract for her in the first place, which was unthinkable for a man who didn't even allow himself to make the smallest of mistakes. He had no idea how he could have let this happen. The only explanation he could think of was some unnatural power diverting his attention from it. Excuse me, you're not supposed to tell me, you're not supposed to call me out like that. My. You can simply call me the head maid, as you have all these years. I'm the master of the house, and I'm telling you to tell me your name, he said in his unflinching business voice. To which she gave him the same smile as ever. And then when she offered him the name she believed to be her own, the air in the room seemed to crack. My name is Morgana, master. No, that's my name, you... God dang it.
Jacopo's eyes went wide. While he wasn't as prone to shouting now as he had been in his emotionally troubled 20s, that was enough to push him over the edge. "No, it's not!" he yelled, unsure why he was so certain. There was another crack in the air between them. He lurched out of his chair, the force sending it toppling to the floor. She, meanwhile, looked only mildly surprised. "No, that name does not belong to you." "Oh my, then to whom does it belong?" She giggled. Every second he spent in the presence of that stony smile felt like a knife to the heart. By any reasonable measure, she was in the right. He had no place to deny someone else their name. But deep down, he just couldn't accept that name as belonging to the head maid. "Master, your hand." He looked down to see his fist clenched around the still-lit cigar. The faint smell of burnt flesh rose up from it, though he didn't even feel the heat. Jacopo threw the crushed cigar to the ground. He had no idea why hearing a single name had sent him into such a frenzy, and not having an explanation only agitated him further. "I think that's enough. That's quite enough conversation for one day." Oh, whoops. That was her speaking. I should have let that sentence finish out there. "I think that's quite enough conversation for one day. Please, just call me the head maid as you always have." "Now do excuse me, master," she said, and Jacopo could only watch in silence as she drifted out of his office. Jacopo's wife's bedroom was on the second floor next to his own, specifically the room she had used in the early days of their marriage. In response to information shared with him by a good friend, which he trusted blindly, he had moved her to the first floor. And then, still unable to trust her, he had relocated her to an entirely separate building on the property. And I can hear Maria laughing in the background. "Damn right, bitch!" Her room on the second floor had remained untouched since her disappearance. Knowing she was sensitive to sunlight, he'd had heavy, light-blocking curtains installed in the windows. And then, so the room didn't feel too gloomy, he'd had it furnished with white fabrics and light wooden furniture. And it was all still there. He included the room in the maid's daily cleaning duties, but many of them considered it a waste of time, so occasionally it would be neglected. In the past, he would have yelled at them for that, but now he just gave them stern reminders to do all their assigned work. Which worked, though he could tell they weren't pleased. No one actually believed his wife would ever come back. After losing everything at the age of 26, he had set out in search of his missing wife, both with his own 2 feet and by hiring private investigators to look for her all across the globe. But even after so many years, he had nothing to show for it. Jacopo was beginning to think himself that she would never be back, but he wouldn't give up for any reason. She had waited steadfastly for him, even after being broken mentally and spiritually, so he had an obligation to do the same. It wasn't worth much, but it was the least he could do for her, being the one responsible for hurting her so. He wished to have just one last chance to see her again and atone for all the damage he had done. That was the only thing keeping him alive, now that he had nothing else. He stood quietly in his wife's bedroom. On the desk sat her kaleidoscope, damn, or whatever the hell it is, yellowed over the years. He could still see her calling it her Phenicus wheel, with a gentle smile on her face. Phenicistoscope, the same smile he had stolen from her and crushed under his feet. "It's a pleasure to meet you." He could hear her voice as clear as the day they had gotten married. Hers was a soft, almost musical voice, the sound of which he would never forget. "It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Michelle." They first met on the day of their wedding in the waiting room. She was wearing a veil at the time, so it wasn't until they made their vows that he saw the brilliantly affectionate smile on her face. A perfect match for her name, he thought, which came from the archangel Mihail. There was no one for whom an angel's name was more appropriate. But now the pieces had come loose with the head maid's earth-shaking proclamation, and they were coming together to form a different picture altogether. On the day Jacopo met his wife, somewhere deep down, he felt as though he had known her sometime long ago. That he had been searching for her that entire time, and had wanted nothing more than to bask in the light of that smile once more. And he would do anything to make sure she never lost it again. He saw a vision of a forlorn graveyard he had never seen before. A young girl crouched before a makeshift headstone, turning back to look at him. her smile, the same as the woman he had married. His eyes went wide and he thought he was crying, but they were perfectly dry. He had long since lost the ability to weep. Was Michelle really your name? Jacopo's soul was bound by 2 sets of chains, weighed down by 2 great transgressions. He could feel them both distinctly. He understood how terrible the things he had done were, and that he deserved no redemption. A few days later, Jacopo was returning from an on-site inspection and decided to pass through the garden on the way. A woman with long black hair crouched before a small flower bed, practically blending into the night. Hearing her master's footsteps, she stood up, brushed the dirt off her skirt, and gave him an ever-flawless smile. "Good evening, master. What brings you to the garden this evening?" "I was looking for you," he said. "Oh my. You've not been yourself lately, sir. Is it love? Because I'm afraid my heart already belongs to someone else." "That's not funny. My heart's already taken, too. And not by you." She giggled impishly. "You are quite right, master. You would never tell the object of your affection I was looking for you." "Hey, that's your boss you're talking to." Jacopo sighed, glancing over at the flower bed. The whole area had once been a magnificent rose garden, but he had ordered it destroyed 9 years earlier. Enough time had passed that he was able to grow out of his irrational hatred of flowers, though. Also, I think I know now which side stories I need to do. I think all of them on the second page are the ones I gotta do. And so it was the head maid's efforts that had brought it back to life, though on a smaller scale for the time being. "I apologize for what I did to the rose garden," he said, which elicited a bewildered stare from her. Her gaze still averted, he continued. "You were fond of the roses too, weren't you? You mentioned coming out to look at the flowers with one of your previous masters. The nobleman, wasn't it? And now that I think about it, you were the one who looked after the garden the most as well." The head maid let his words hang in the air for a few moments, then gave him a quizzical look. What has gotten into him, she thought. But giving it a bit more consideration, she understood. He had plenty of time to reflect on his mistake, so perhaps an apology was not so surprising. She had grown so numb to the passage of time that she'd forgotten Jacopo was just a young businessman still getting his feet wet when they'd first met. So green that he had seen no trouble in hiring a mysterious maid who refused to talk about herself, eventually assigning her the position of head maid. Power, influence, business relationships, restless nights, constant betrayal. The pressures of the life he had chosen had corrupted him. And then in the wake of a great tragedy, he had managed to rid himself of some of that corruption. But only after he had lost the 2 people to whom that change would matter most. "You need not apologize to me for anything," she said. "As a matter of fact, I bear some fault myself for failing to see the truth. I could have stopped you, master, and I could have prevented the destruction of the rose garden, too." "You're just a maid," he said. "You were in no position to see anything I couldn't. I should have caught on to Maria's scheming sooner, and I should have trusted my wife." "The truth I failed to see was not theirs. It was yours, master." "Mine?" "Yes. I failed to see the kindness and love in your heart." Jacopo glared at the smiling head maid like she just told him an offensive joke. "If that were true, I wouldn't have been so obsessed with money and personal gain. I wouldn't have killed my closest friend, and I wouldn't have abused my wife." "Were your monetary desires truly as selfish as you claim?" He clenched his teeth, turning away from her clear jade eyes. He felt like she was looking straight through him. "You wanted the money," she said, "for your homeland, your family, your friend, your beloved. Am I mistaken?" "Yes, you are," he spat. While it was true he had wanted money for all those things, they were not his only motivators. He'd also wanted it for the power, to put himself on top of the world, safe from anyone who would betray him. But eventually, money and power changed from the means into the goal itself, sending him far off the path. Had he simply kept his eye on his true objective, rather than obsessing endlessly over how to protect himself, he could have done more for both Maria and his wife. The head maid gave him a somewhat melancholy smile. "If you so insist, master, then yes, I am mistaken. Nonetheless, it is all in the past now, and neither of us can take back the choices we made then." precisely. He could say it was all supposed to be for his wife or Maria, but what would that accomplish? Nothing. Allegedly noble intentions didn't excuse the kind of pain he had caused. He let out a short sigh, casting all those thoughts aside. I was looking for you because I need you for something. Yes? What can I help you with? She asked. He turned his gaze towards the mansion, staring up a tall, long abandoned tower. It seemed almost radiant in the light of the full moon. Come with me. When Jacopo purchased the mansion, it had already gone through repairs to bring it up to a habitable condition. Habitable. There was just one area that remained conspicuously in disrepair. Initially, he was planning to have the strange decrepit tower demolished. Oh god, the tower. No. I remember. There was no point in having it repaired only to sit unused, so he wanted to replace it with something actually useful, like a storeroom. But for some reason which he still didn't understand, he could never bring himself to destroy the tower. The entrance to the tower was at the back of what he called the Second Great Hall, a mostly unused hall near the back of the property. There were rumors among the maids about strange sounds and ghosts and blood dripping from the ceiling, going as far back as when Maria was still alive. Back then, he recalled telling her it was all nonsense, and that he said that he had no interest in you women's little ghost stories. But the truth was, something did seem off about the hall. That's what I died, you asshole! Not in a frightening or unsettling way, though. Being there, he felt smothered with guilt and shackled with sorrow. So he avoided going to the Second Great Hall as much as possible. He hadn't even had lights installed in the hall, so stepping through the door felt like entering an entirely isolated realm of darkness. Jacopo and the head maid each carried oil lamps to light their way through the hall. At the far end stood a door, not opened in countless years. Just an ordinary wooden door, though, with a simple lock. Not a heavy metal one with a complicated 3-key lock. As he unlocked the door with his master key, the head maid whispered, "Why did you bring me here?" She considered following it up with, "Were you too scared to come on your own?" But even she couldn't bring herself to make light of things in the tower's presence. No, of course not. I started paying more attention to you recently after the last maid quit, and I noticed when you're not focused on something, you're looking towards one of two places. The former rose garden, or this tower. So I thought it would be best to bring you with me when I came to see the tower. I see. The inside of the tower was black as the abyss, even darker than the hall leading to it. The light from their 2 oil lamps revealed a long, long spiral staircase leading up. And something stirred in the long frozen heart of the head maid at the sight of that staircase. Jacopo set a foot on the first stair, pressing down on it hard in several places. It let out low creaks under his weight, but it didn't seem to be in danger of breaking. That said, it was still an abandoned tower, at night, and nobody knew they were here. This was a terrible idea that could go wrong at any time, and he knew it. Watching him slowly climb the stairs, the head maid's chest grew tight. For an instant, she wasn't seeing him, but someone else. They were holding her by the hand, running up and up and up and... Why did you want to see the tower? She said, trying to bring herself back to the present. Hell if I know. She tilted her head. He almost never acted without a clear reason. All I do know is I got the strangest feeling I would find something about myself here. I see, she said, putting on a smile. I, too, have a strange feeling that I will find something of myself here. Climbing the decaying staircase was a long, arduous process. Every so often they passed a window carved out of the stone wall. The light from the moon illuminated the path before them, guiding a sinner and prisoner ever upward. After more revelations than the head maid was able to count, the end was finally in sight. But there was one final obstacle before they could reach the door at the top. The next section of the staircase had collapsed. Shall we head back? The head maid asked. If they were to attempt to proceed, one of them would undoubtedly slip and take a fall straight down to hell. Surely Jacopo would realize there was no way forward and give up. But she was wrong. Leaning against the stone wall for support, he placed his right foot on what little remained of the next stair, and then he carefully guided his left foot to the next. Several slow, meticulous steps later, a chunk of stone gave out under his weight, tumbling downward into the abyss. But even that was not enough to stop his determined procession. She watched him in silence. She was not afraid that he might fall, however, because if that were to happen, then that simply meant he was fated to die here. It was an insignificant detail to her. As long as she was able to wait for her beloved to return, nothing else mattered. But he made it across the collapsed region unharmed. It seemed the mansion was not ready to be rid of him just yet. God damn it, I intentionally placed that there to torture him, but apparently he was able to break through. God damn it. He turned around, shining his oil lamp over the gap. You're free to wait there. No, she said. I will accompany you. She then gracefully lifted her skirt off the ground and followed the same crumbling path across the chasm he had. When she finally made it across, it gave her a smug smirk. Damn, and here I thought you were going to float across like a ghost. I guess you really are alive. To which she responded with a little smile. They resumed their climb, soon reaching the top level of the tower. Beyond a door, half rotted away, sat a chamber with a single window high upon the wall. Through it shone a pillar of moonlight. The two of them entered the chamber, proceeding to the center of the room. The air inside was far colder than the autumn night they had left behind. It chilled them both to their bones, to their souls. Jacopo stood in place, gazing up at the window for some time. Then he walked up to the stone wall, dropping to his knees in front of what appeared to be nothing at all. He traced the irregular surface with his fingers, his hands slowly forming into a fist and dropping lifelessly to the hard floor. She could hardly see a trace of the powerful, wealthy businessman he was in that slouched form. He seemed so much smaller, on the verge of withering away. Did you find something about yourself here? She asked, her voice carrying a well in the cold, empty chamber. Yeah, he said, his voice shaking. There was far more contained in that single syllable than she could ever hope to discern. For a moment, she thought he was crying. But from the glimpse she caught of his face, his eyes were dry, though he looked pale as a ghost. She stepped toward him, gently placing her hand upon his back. And then she spoke, breaking her personal vow to remain an observer. If you wish to end your life here, I can offer you my hand. The man spun around to face her. There was neither anger nor surprise in his eyes, though. Why would you say that? I do not know, she said. Seeing you there on your knees, the words simply came out. I felt as though that was what you wanted. She lowered herself to her knees as well, so their eyes were at the same level. He flinched, but did not avert his gaze from hers. All right, he muttered, barely audible. There was a time when I did want that. A long time ago. But still, I descended those stairs. I couldn't let myself just toss aside what I'd sacrificed everything to attain. Even knowing there was only suffering to be found at the bottom? That's exactly why. I had to own it. Just like I have to own my mistakes now. I see. Then I shall observe and see where this path takes you. What a wretched man, she thought, smiling. She was an experienced enough maid to know to keep that thought to herself, though. And she herself was also a wretched woman, who had wanted to die alongside her love at the top of this very tower. But in her broken mind, those memories had been transformed into a fairy tale. The full moon had begun its descent by the time they left the cold chamber. At the collapsed section of stairs, Jacopo crossed first, as he had going up. The head maid then made to follow after him, but was instead greeted to his hand extended across the gap. She stilted her head. Obviously, he was offering her assistance in crossing, but she had made it over with no difficulty the first time, so she couldn't understand why. Not to mention the master of the house had no obligation to help a lowly maid. But bathed in the glow of the moon, her hand stretched out to take his, before she realized what happened. They had both lost those they cared about most. And when their fingers touched, he saw a bright, spirited young woman with an infectious smile, and she saw a kind-hearted and sometimes sarcastic young man. Giselle and the slave, vestiges of their long-forgotten selves, bursting forth for the tiniest, most insignificant of moments.
Michelle, to tell you the truth, I wanted nothing more than to descend these stairs with you, hand in hand. Morgana, to tell you the truth, I wanted nothing more than to go back to those days when I could still take your hand.
By the time the head maid had made it across the collapsed stairs, the shadow of their old selves disappeared without a trace. Only the maid who always wore a smile and the forlorn businessman remained there in the tower. A faint connection had formed between them, though. A shared isolation and emptiness. An empathy as similarly damaged souls. But that too would fade in time, their connection as fleeting as an autumn night. With him leading the way and her following behind, they descended the spiral staircase together.
And what about you? He asked. Were you able to find that something about yourself here?
Yes, she said. I believe I did. But I fear it'll slip through my fingers again before long.
You never struck me as the forgetful type.
I have been for some time. I have no room for new memories anymore.
Well, that's probably for the best, he said.
It would be best if you forgot what you found here as well.
Not a chance. My, she said.
You are quite the intractable one.
I could say the same about you.
Say, Master?
What is it?
I want to tell you something before I forget the things I felt tonight.
Yeah?
I was not terribly fond of you when we first met.
That sounds about right.
But that is not true any longer.
Is that so?
It is.
The truth is, I thought you were creepy as hell at first. Didn't even want to look at you.
That sounds about right.
But that's not the case anymore.
Is that so?
Yeah, it is.
You see? You look for the reasons why I truly love the house in Fata Morgana and look no further. Okay, let's see. If memory serves, that's the moment that Mel meets Morgana. Scarlet in the coffee house. Damn it, I need to figure out which of these extra stories. I need to figure this out! Okay, so I actually went back and looked through my older videos, and interestingly enough, A Slow Killing Poison, Defectives, and The Painting's Ramblings are from the other story that I did involving the actual, like, the full fleshed out backstory for Jacopo and Morgana and Maria and even the Lord. It's from that version. So I believe if that's the actual case, then the Revenant's dream probably is the real beginning here. One, two. Oh, there we go. That's really freaking weird. Actually, you know what? Let's do this. I think this is probably where I need to start.
Farewell, Jacopo, until our souls cross paths once more in the boundless sphere of fate.
Goodbye, Morgana.
She believed that was the end of it all. that by releasing their souls from the curse, they would all return to their rightful places, that the realm containing the cursed mansion would dissipate, and the natural order of the world would take care of the rest. And it's playing this song. Both she and the good-hearted young man who had guided her to her salvation believed that, but the young man underestimated how strong his love was, and the girl underestimated how wholly and thoroughly he blamed himself. He sent her off and then remained in place. He could not forgive himself for what he had done, and so he did not deserve to move on. The Revenant's dream. The next thing she realized, she was in a field of gold, wheat rolling in the wind like a golden ocean. Actually, I think I've already seen this. This is literally how that one story actually ends. This is that special ending from the Requiem for Innocence ending right here. This is the Requiem for Innocence special ending. Isn't it? I think it is. Nope, I actually think this is new, or maybe this is an actual no. I think this might actually be new. The sky, blue as sapphire. The breeze almost startlingly warm. It was an unbelievably gentle view, and one she did not recognize. She had never seen this place before, never been there before, yet looking out at it now, she felt emotional. It was almost terrifyingly beautiful, and as if drawn in by it, the girl took a step forward. With each subsequent step, the soft sound of crunching beneath her feet grew more distinct. Evidently, her soul had begun taking physical form, and it was her body from life that the golden ocean created for her. She raised her left arm, which had been severed before she was placed in captivity. It was whole. Still uncertain, she placed a hand on her cheek. There she found none of the scars or the rough texture of the markings that had caused her so much torment in life. What's going on here? She was perplexed. Where was this place? When was it? And what was she doing here, in that form, no less? The girl continued walking in spite of her consternation. In spite of herself at that. It was the gentlest domains that had always caused her the most pain. The most pleasant memories were the sharpest knives. If her life had taught her one thing, it was that. And from then on, she had done everything in her power to eliminate those things. Which is why she had locked the warmly inviting master bedroom in the accursed mansion and threw the key into the painting. But now, she was being drawn into another such realm. She felt as though she needed to push forward. And soon as she approached the far edge of the wheat field, she caught sight of a figure. Seeing it, she stopped dead with a gulp. She knew what this world was. It was his world. Much like she had crafted her own realm to contain her curse, he too had built himself a world of illusion. Upon reaching this realization, a flood of images and memories rushed over her. But this was not unusual, as she had experienced projections of others' memories in the cursed mansion as well. The living and the dead perceived the world differently. For while the living were bound by their bodies, the dead were bound by recollections and emotions. Nonetheless, it had been Michelle, not her, who had dived into the memories directly. So this was her first time truly experiencing the phenomenon herself. Though she was uncertain as to whether the experience was intensified by her own involvement in these specific memories. They were of her as a child, of the young man applying ointment to her face every day for 3 years. She would claim it unnecessary, insult him, complain in any way she could, but still the young man came back the next day. Even on days she fought to the point of truly angering him, he still applied the ointment. He was a strange man, she thought. For what purpose did he pay her so much mind? No other men wanted to get near her. The hideous scars covering her face were quite an effective deterrent, and would most probably cut off their own hands before voluntarily touching them. He alone was different, though. One day, he chastised her for making the trek to the graveyard every day, in rain or snow or anything in between, but she realized now that his criticism applied to him as well. In the pouring rain or the midst of a blizzard, in winds so strong they could knock a grown man to the ground, or even when he was hurt or sick himself, he never missed a day coming to find her at the graveyard. Next,
She saw the rising sun, being carried on his back, traveling a different path home than the one she knew. The stench of decomposing flesh, unavoidable in alleys of the slums. Her surroundings utterly repugnant, yet the sunrise oddly enchanting. The sun's light even reaches this deep, dark corner of the world. I mean, of course it does, but I don't know, for some reason it seems particularly bright to me. She said nothing in response, but she felt the same way. She had spent her whole life looking down at her feet, never taking the time to look up and appreciate the sky. She likely never would have either. Never been able to see the beauty in the rising sun without a nudge. And subsequently, whenever the evil lord would show himself in her dreams, she was able to close her eyes and to block him out, until eventually she was no longer able to remember his face or the sound of his voice.
Well, the good news is I'm here to immediately give you that sound. And I'm just trying to, I don't know, I'm being mean.
Her wounds were at last beginning to heal. He had given her so much. An ordinary life, an ordinary happiness, the freedom from having to be special, and warmth she had never before known. Ah, but those memories only served to salt her wounds. Every image of the slave boy showing her kindness was another crack in her foundation. I can't. He killed me! With the same hands he had used to treat her wounds, he later took her life. It tainted all her memories, shattered the illusion of warmth, ruined her all the way down to her soul, turned everything into hatred and anger. A fury so intense that even the young saint's unconditional love was insufficient to assuage it. The only reason she had managed to maintain her composure at the very end was because Michelle was there with her, holding her hand. She would not have gone to see him at all otherwise. But now she was alone, so she would leave. She had no interest in seeing that man again. And when she had made to head back the way she had come, she caught a glance at the shadowy figure's condition. It was beaten and broken, crumbling away. She looked down in silence on the shadow, which barely maintained its own form. She had seen souls decay to this state before, such as Michelle's when he arrived at the mansion after centuries lost, broken down and reformed again and again, with only Giselle's voice as his guide. By the time he found his way there, he was unrecognizable. Hardly a wisp of spirit, incapable of individual thought, blindly following Giselle's lead. She understood why Michelle's soul had taken so much damage. He had been abused and mistreated to an unimaginable degree his entire life. It made sense that he would wish for an ending more permanent than even death. But him, what are you doing so broken? She could not understand what had brought him to this point. He was the perpetrator, a monster. No matter how kind he had been to her before, that did not change what he had done after that. So what did he think he was doing looking so mangled and beaten? If she left him there before long, his soul would disappear for good. Rubbed out of existence, never to return to the boundless sphere of fate. Good, let him. She bit her lip. Yes, let him. Then she would be free of his torture once and for all. She would never have to see him again. Never have to torment herself with thoughts of him. And what a relief that would be. So she tried to turn back, but her body would not let her. An emotion she did not understand had welled up in her breast. It was pity, though she could not put a name to it herself. It was an emotion she had never felt during her time as the witch. And in fact, were the witch here, she would have cackled joyously at the sight, pointing a skeletal finger at the pathetic thing he had become and telling him how much he deserved it. But she was no longer that witch. And furthermore, she had been blessed with unconditional love by Michelle and Giselle, and the benevolent portion of her soul, which she had rent from herself to create the white-haired girl, was beginning to return to its rightful place. She thought she heard a voice from within, telling her that only she could save him. She frowned. Why should she have to save him after all the pain and suffering he had caused for her? The voice within spoke. Michelle had stepped forward to save her after all the pain and suffering she had put him through. Giselle, too, held no grudge after being imprisoned in the mansion by her for centuries, happily joining Michel on his quest. She took a single step forward. The wheat swayed as she did, making the scene even more dreamlike. Initially, she had been irritated to find him here, trying to hide from his sins in this realm of illusion. But now, she was beginning to realize that was not the case. His memories and feelings flowed over, with more clarity this time. This was what he could have had if he had not made all his mistakes. And this was the place he had hoped to show her. He was not hiding from his sins. He was attempting to atone for them. He had condemned his sins, lamented his failures, and forced himself to look at this vision of the world he had let slip through his fingers.
He's basically torturing himself with images of what he could have had. Again and again until it destroyed his soul. This was his punishment for himself. And not only for what he had done to Morgana, but her other half, the white-haired girl as well. She had said in the letter that she wished to see his homeland, and he had failed to see that through as well. Twice, he had broken what he was supposed to care about most. Twice, he had crushed her. And he could never forgive himself for that. Not even after she had released him from her curse. You truly are the biggest fool in all the world. She had never in all her time seen more of a disaster of a man. Though she was beginning to realize that part of the reason he had done this to himself was because she had rejected his offer to make amends. Told him she would not punish him any further. Not to mention, he was not entirely at fault for his actions in his second life. She had wished to see his life in ruins. She had, in a sense, placed him on that path herself. But he was not one who could place the blame for his actions on others. Everything was always his responsibility and his alone. He was like that in his first life, and his second, and in the illusory alternate scenario where Michel intervened. Ultimately, I'm the one responsible, he said on their march to atonement. And I suppose, to make sure their next lives go a little better, he said, excluding himself from any potential redemption. So what, though? That doesn't change what he did. Are you saying I should have sent him off with a smile? That I should have set aside my hatred to make the man who hurt me feel better? She took another step toward the amorphous shadow, still unsure of her own position. The closer she got, the more she wanted to run away. What would she say? What would she do? She had not an inkling of an idea. Not a single, fully formed thought about what came after this. The shade noticed her lifting his head. He tensed up. It was hideous, hardly even recognizable as human. But she could tell somehow that it was smiling at her. It must have been made up of all the things he had wanted to do for her, she thought. The shade seemed to think she was part of the illusion. In that case, she could just play along with it. Pretending she was another phantom in this dreamscape would reduce the pressure on her, giving her time to think. Though in truth, she likely wanted to indulge in that fantasy herself. The long-lost possibility of nothing going wrong, of him finding their homeland. Even knowing it was all a sham, an insignificant sliver of a dream, she probably still wanted to partake in its warmth. And maybe then, she would be able to give him a genuine smile. So, what's on the agenda for the day? That's how the other one started! That's all. We're actually through her perspective now. The ending of Requiem for Innocence was through Jacopo's perspective, so okay. We're finally seeing Morgana's perspective. That's initially, she only intended to play along with the illusion, but in time she found herself being drawn into the dream world as well. A fantasy where he had never become the Lord, she never the witch, and the both of them lived uneventful lives in their undiscovered homeland. It was pleasant and peaceful, and she soon began enjoying it in earnest. She had turned off her mind, simply started accepting things as they happened, which she was only able to do because he was hardly recognizable as him. She felt like she had really gone back to being a 16-year-old girl,
like she had grown up a normal life, not filled with tragedy. And oh, how wonderful that would have been if it could have been true. He asked her to sing for him, so she brought him into the shade of a large tree. He told her he had borrowed a lute, but he held nothing in his amorphous hands, so she merely played along. In his vision of this realm, there were others like us for him to borrow from. They sat down in the shade of the tree and sang, only her voice to carry the tune. Like Michelle in the same condition, the shade was barely able to produce any coherent sound, let alone music. But still, she could tell what he was trying to say and how he was saying it. The longer she spent in the realm of illusion, the more her own state of mind reverted to those days. The 3 years when she had been able to experience happiness like anyone else, but continuing until she reached the age of 16. She was smiling and laughing, though she hardly realized it herself. Nor did she recall that she had explicitly told him previously that she could not smile. In time, she found herself able to speak of her younger days, something she had not told him even in life. How she was known as a saint, how her blood had miraculous powers, and the people of her village began worshipping her for it. She had, on some level, wanted to talk about that with him in life, wanted to open herself up to him more, wanted him to know more who she really was. No, just an ordinary girl. He spoke in an unearthly voice, like thousands of rocks scraping against one another. But to her ears, it was the sound of the young slave man's voice. His slightly exasperated, always gentle tone. She smiled. "You've said as much so many times now I'm almost beginning to believe it," she said, wondering if he would have been the one to give her warmth if things had gone differently. Obviously, that was but a hypothetical future, and one they could have never reached, no less. But she had softened up enough to entertain such silly fantasies. She also thought about her homeland. Not the small, isolated village where she had been born, but some place farther up her bloodline. Her real father's home. "Would you like to meet him?" She was telling him of her father when he suddenly asked her that. "Oh! Would you like to meet him?" She was not sure, and she racked her brain in consideration. It was not something she really needed to think about. There was no family here for her to find anymore, after all, but she had indulged herself so deeply in the past that reality was not a concern. She spoke of her father with a hint of sadness in her voice, to which the shade responded with a sudden surge of rage. The whole dreamscape warped around him, and the metallic smell of blood permeated the region. He wanted to seek out her father and mete out divine justice, and the world twisted to fit his image. "Any form of violence is forbidden," she shouted, attempting to calm his fury. "Not even if it's for my sake," she continued. Anytime he had managed to obtain any form of power, it had led him down the path of destruction. He knew no other way to wield it. And because doing so had shown to be effective in accomplishing his immediate goals, he had never bothered to look for any other solutions. Which ultimately resulted in him being unable to trust anyone because he only understood power as a blunt object. I just really love this music. He was a soft, cowardly man deep down. But because he learned to kill, "I don't want you to hurt anyone else ever again." The more he hurt others, the more he hurt himself. This was a lesson that was long, long overdue for him. The shadow stared at her in silence for several minutes, as the blood and fiery rage twisting the illusory realm slowly receded. When it was gone, the shade too seemed to return to normal, nodding and saying, "All right, I won't." She let out a sigh of relief. She had slipped entirely back into her childhood. They talked more about everything and nothing, such as the Midsummer Festival, the memory of which filled her with yearning for those times, when everyone was still together, with him, his friend Maria, his companion Gratian, and the eternally cheerful Jiren. She was never terribly fond of gatherings of that many people, and that had not changed even now, but she was able to reminisce about it and admit that it had not been entirely awful, that it had been an important formative moment of her youth, and probably the same for the rest of them as well. The three girls holding hands and dancing in a circle, him him playing a tune on the lute and his friend providing a beat. It was a marvelous day. As she reflected, she realized he had been chasing overly ambitious dreams from the very beginning. All his talk of going out into the world, of taking her with him. And he was no different here in this realm of illusion. Eventually, she grew tired of hearing his fantasies, telling him, "Climb down off your high horse and adjust." If he was going to keep chasing after stupid dreams, she would laugh at him every time. If he was going to keep chasing after impossible ideals, she would drag him back down to earth. That way, he would never.
Then, I'll just have to find a new dream. Excuse me?
Her mouth hung open in a mix of exasperation and shock, and perhaps a trace of anger. She wanted to shout, tell him how all this idiotic dreams ended with him in shambles, but he seemed unable to pick up on her trepidation, continuing unfazed.
I'm going to win.
She stood aghast. That was the last thing she ever expected to hear from him. Even knowing this whole world was his fantasy about what he wished he could have done for her, she was conflicted. She felt many things, but flattered was a line she would never cross. No matter how much she had reverted to her younger self here, her present self still remained. You murdered me.
There's nothing you can do to win my heart. Not a single thing.
She found herself very close to saying what she felt, but she set her agitation aside to let the dream continue below. For her own peace of mind, or his. From that point, he became almost impressively brazen, even asking her to call him by his name. To which she frowned and said, in no uncertain terms,
"Why would I waste my breath?"
visibly disheartening. After some time having to watch him mope, she could bear it no longer and attempted to raise a new subject. But whether she asked him about learning to play the lute or going fishing together, the only response she received was a half-hearted nod. She sighed in a complete loss. And then the shadow spoke.
Will you say my name?
Again. Why was he so fixated on such a stupid, insignificant thing? But as he continued, she realized his request was more pitiful and heartfelt than she had ever heard from him.
I don't want you to forget.
She gasped.
I don't want you to forget me again.
Cracks developed in the shadow.
I don't want you to forget what I look like.
It wavered, shook, crumbled.
The sound of my voice.
But still he pleaded desperately.
Or how I feel about you.
The man who refused to lean on anyone was begging for her validation.
I don't want you to forget what we talked about.
They were all things she had long since forgotten about him.
What kind of man I was.
Things she had locked away in the deepest recesses of her mind.
Or all the time we shared together.
Memories overflowing with so much warmth there. She cast it all out. His name, his face, his everything.
Don't forget me.
Which was what had allowed her to mistake him for the Lord. She felt a chill listening to the shade beg and plead endlessly. What was she supposed to do here? At the very least, this meant the end of the peaceful, trouble-free illusion.
Why would you ask me that now?
She said, her voice strained.
I was hoping to.
She was hoping to bask in the illusion a while longer. The shadow said nothing. It simply sat there waiting for her answer. She mulled over the question for a while, then took another step toward it. She was close enough to touch it now, but she would never do that. A feeling welled up in her breast. A mixture of wanting to scream, burst into tears, and throw things around like a small child. She forced it back, looking down on the shade.
If I had remembered, would anything have been any different? Could we have not ended up so far down the wrong path? If I had gone and found you, would have that... Wait. Oh, if I had gone and found... Wait. Who the hell's...
I'm assuming the ones in italics is Jacopo talking, and then the full text here is what is Morgana talking. I think that's what it's trying to imply here.
If I had gone and found you, would that have stopped you from becoming what you did? There were 1,000 things she could have done differently. If, after taking up at the cottage on the lake, she had gone into town even once, she could have found out they had a new lord. Maybe he was the one who had sent that knight to visit her cottage, who she had sent away without talking to. Not to mention, if she had only told him about her childhood, the rumors about her blood having healing powers, he would have been able to make the connection between her and the lakeside witch. If she had done something, maybe she could have stopped him from veering off the straight and narrow. In fact, she was likely the only person who could have stopped him. Why am I blaming myself for his mistakes? He's the only one responsible for his choices. She did not know what to do. She had been at a loss ever since learning the truth. The answers had only brought her more pain, and so she had buried them away somewhere out of sight. That must be why. That must have been why she had not yet returned to her rightful place. While she had been brought unto salvation by the hands of an angel, ceased being the witch, the girl inside was as wounded and suffering as ever. Can I hold your hand? The shade resumed its pleading. Its desperation clawed at her chest, and so rather than coldly denying her request, she found herself saying, "Do as you please." The shadow slowly extended his hand up to hers, as if scared. It was not playing its part very well. This was supposed to be a dream where nothing had gone wrong between them after all. But the illusion had begun to give way to harsh reality. The reality of having murdered the girl he loved. The reality of having been brutally abused and killed by the man she had leaned on for support. They had both once cared for each other in a very similar way. Yet the end result was not love, but terrible tragedy. He was terrified to show someone affection with hands that had only ever brought destruction. And so before he did, he said, "I promised I wouldn't touch you without permission." She knew it was just an excuse, though, that he was simply afraid. Worried about putting his bloody hand on her, that he might hurt her again, that he might corrupt her, that he had no right to. But he overcame all that, gently placing his arms around her, as if he had been one waiting centuries for this moment. It was an embrace of many things, love for her, deep regret, and most of all, atonement. He's wanting to do this. In his arms, she could feel everything he felt. Since the day I locked his soul in that mansion. She thought back to that time. The unfathomable amount of time she spent as the witch, a force of pure hatred and vengeance. His was the last soul she entrapped, and when she did, he was little more than an amorphous shadow. It took many, many years for him to regain a human form, but even then he was unable to move or speak. He simply wailed something incomprehensible at her again and again. At the time, I thought he was saying how much he hated me, but she was wrong. He had simply wanted to atone, but he had no idea how. Look at you, a grown man shaking like a fawn. As the shadow embraced her, it trembled, sobbing loudly into her shoulder. She had never seen him cry before, though she was unsure if this counted, since she could only feel it through the nebulous shade. Sometimes I can't tell if you have a heart of stone or of glass. Her entire body went limp. All the tension in her nerves released at once, and she felt like a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Though, I suppose I'm not terribly different in that regard. Unable to even speak my heart unless there's no one else around. Unable to face you except through this childish fantasy. Not even able to show any vulnerability. Maybe she hated to even entertain the thought, but perhaps they were more similar than she wanted to admit. Sometime long ago, in the memories she had banished away, he told her that being close made people more open with each other. And it turned out he was right about that. She began to speak, to tell him the truth of how she felt, letting spill forth the raw pain within, holding nothing back. She told him how she despised him more than anything in the world, because he showed her happiness, then the depths of despair, that she had no idea what to do with him. How she did regret some of her actions, such as misdirecting her anger. He was consumed by regret over what he had done to her, but he was not the only one who had regrets.
As their minds and spirits intermingled, the true shape of her wounds grew apparent. He had hurt her, but she had hurt him too. She had blamed him not only for his own sins, but the sins of another man as well. And for that, she had laughed at him, cursed him, mocked him for trying to show something resembling care of another human being. Again and 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 again.
I should have known better than anyone how much he was capable of caring, though.
She thought back to the decisive moment. Knowing the truth now, she finally understood the full effect of the things she had said, to an even greater degree than Michelle had told her. She had told the man who had spent 3 years looking after her, coming to apply ointment to her scarred face, rain or snow, that she despised him with all her soul, that he had ruined her life. She had not been seen clearly at the time, but he had been teetering on the edge as well, and her saying that had been the final push. It was my words that ultimately pushed you over the edge, wasn't it? How had it all ended up like this? Why did they have to hurt each other so much? What was the turning point that sent them so far off the path? He continued holding on to her for some time, pleading for a chance to make amends, spilling his heart, clinging to her like a little child. It was something he could have never done in life, or even in death. It was only after repeatedly crushing himself beneath overwhelming regret until he was mangled and hardly recognizable that he was able to show her his weakness, that he was able to show her his tears. But it was far too late. It was all over. Nothing he asked for was something she could give him. No matter how much she begged, she could never stop hating him, could never forgive him. Fissures began to form in her spirit. Memories of her youth brought with them emotions long lost, of the time she first directly acknowledged his kindness. It was a bitter, sweet, agonizing, suffocating, innocent feeling. Many years ago, when I was still a child, I looked up to him. The sunrise she saw that morning carried on his back only seemed as beautiful as it did because he had shown it to her. She then grew to yearn the lost homeland he spoke, admire his lofty dreams, and feel warmth in his hands as he spread the ointment. That was when the seed was planted, not only of the ability to feel joy, but love as well. I might have even had some fondness of her. And having said that, she noticed the clear droplets rolling down her cheeks. After Michelle finished unveiling the truth, she shouted, "I cried for him!" in a frenzy. And those tears she had shed contained all her feelings for him. On the day of her 12th birthday, that terrible, tragic day, she cried and told the man in the slave cart, "I'm sad because I didn't get the chance to show my gratitude to people very dear to me." And that was the truth. She was grateful to not only this young slave man, but the girls of the brothel as well. She had wanted to open up to them. But the larger portion of her tears were just for one person. She cried for him. She cried for the man who had spent so long trying to help her. She cried because she had not been able to thank him. She cried because she believed him to be dead. She cried for him then. So who did she cry for now? Were these tears for him as well? Were they for herself? No, they were for both of them. She decided to let the illusion continue on a while longer. She knew it was foolish. She had mixed feelings about being here and interacting with him as she had when she was younger. But she had softened up enough to not simply ignore the warmth that it also made her feel. She had found it in herself to accept the seed of kindness sprouting within her. She had found it in herself to acknowledge how she felt. So she would use the dream to lead him to his next destination, under the guise of him holding her hand and leading her. Out of the claws of this foolish fantasy to be released once and for all. She would guide him back into the void, that boundless sphere of fate, so that he may live again. They set off through the fields of waving gold. She squeezed her eyes shut, envisioning the young man she once knew. and when she opened them again, he was there, holding her hand and smiling softly at her.
You know, Jacopo, I really hope we don't ever cross paths again. Nothing good could possibly come from us meeting in the next life. I'm tired of having to deal with you. I hate you, and I pray I never have to see you again. But should you wish to see me, and should that wish take priority over my own, promise you'll treat me well. And if you can manage that, then I am. Finn.
Oh. Alright. That pretty much... Okay, I think that pretty much confirmed it. Okay, so we've witnessed one of the extra stories that's new, the Lost, and then we got to see the Revenant's dream. So it seems like the rest of these are going to be some brand new stories as well, which means we're gonna be in it for the long haul, people. But anyway, if you all like this, be sure to let me know. I do apologize that I kind of screwed this up just a little bit. I done goofed. I really done goofed. But needless to say, I'm just extremely happy that we're finally back into this. So, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about which ones are the extra stories. My memory is telling me that A Slow Killing Poison, Defectives, and The Painting's Ramblings are part of the Requiem for the Innocent story. And I think, starting on the Revenant's Dream, we have a bunch of new... These are all the brand new extra stories. At least, that's what I am thinking. But anyway... If you guys could help me on this one, I'm just trying to do this correctly. But anyway, if you all like this, be sure to let me know. It feels good to be back in Fata Morgana, and I hope you guys are as excited as I am. So thank you all very much for watching. It feels good to be back, and I will see all of you in this endless sphere of fate. I forgot the goddamn line.